Hey everyone, welcome to the September 13th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and this week we are looking back at last weekend's racing from around the country. Most of the stakes action concentrated in two areas. Closing week at Del Mar, they ran the two traditional grade ones for the 2-year-olds that close out their meet, the Del Mar Futurity and Del Mar Debutante. We'll talk about those in addition to some other 2-year-old performances from the last week that achieved some nice speed figures, some that achieved some lower speed figures that we'll mention in passing, but plenty of 2-year-old action from that final week at Del Mar. We'll also talk about some turf racing, one race at Del Mar, and a bunch from Saturday at Kentucky Downs. They ran, I think, 6 grade 2 or grade 3 events on that stacked Saturday card from last Saturday, Kentucky Downs. I know that Craig covered that on the TimeformUS Forecast last week with Larry Colmus, but we'll go through all of those stakes races to recap some of those opinions and some of the horses that put forth notable performances on that card. Then we'll close things out with a couple venues that we don't visit that often, Pimlico and Delaware. Pimlico had a couple of stakes races on Saturday that earned some nice speed figures, and then we'll talk about one off the turf race from earlier in the week at Delaware that you might want to take a look at that I think a lot of people probably missed, taking place on Thursday of last week. But Craig, we saw some really nice speed figures earned this past week at Del Mar, especially from the Bob Baffert stable.
Yeah, no big surprise, I guess, that Bob Baffert would dominate the racing like he did, but some of the speed figures we're going to get to were pretty much off the charts for 2-year-olds in early September. We don't see races like this very often. I know it's way too early to talk Kentucky Derby talk, so I have no idea what's going to happen with these horses going forward, as Bob Baffert's still not eligible to run in the race, but he certainly has a whole bunch of the best colts out there. I saw Marcus Hurst made a tweet of, I forget the exact numbers, but it was a large percentage of the best 2-year-old speed figures so far this year have all come from Bob Baffert horses.
Yeah, we've been seeing some big speed figures come out of California recently, and you said especially for some of those 2-year-olds during the past week. We're going to talk about a few of them. Craig, I briefly do want to turn back the calendar a little bit, because speaking of some gigantic Del Mar speed figures, I didn't get a chance to talk to you about Flightline. I know that you had Marcus Hirsch on, as you kindly allowed me to take a week off this past week, as thankful to Marcus Hirsch and Larry Colmus for filling in. But I know you talked a little bit with Marcus about it, Craig, but I just wanted to briefly bring it up again because, I mean, that was a performance that just kind of left me and I think a lot of other people speechless. And I know that you put out this TimeformUS speed figure, I believe it was a 152, just kind of off the charts. And, there's been a lot of discussion since then about, how do you put this performance in context of history? Do you compare it to Secretariat? You're allowed to use the Flightline's name in the same terms or same lofty air as those horses, given the relatively small number of starts that he's had. I just wanted to briefly talk about it with you because it was such an amazing performance.
It was, and I mean, the 152 speed figure, as you say, I mean, it blew me away. I wasn't expecting anything like that. And I mentioned I didn't even make it. My assistant did it. When I looked at it, I thought it would be a 153. And that was just quickly looking at the final time. And that's exactly what it was. We both kind of agreed. And looking at some other speed figures I've seen, I don't want to knock them. I think they were a little conservative. I saw the buyer figures of 126. I think it could have been faster. I saw the Thoroughgraph number is the fastest that they ever give, at like a -8.5. And even Jerry Brown said he could have made it 2 or 3 points faster. He just couldn't bring himself to do it. So I'm glad that we went with the big number, because I think that was, as far as individual performances go, as good a performance as I've ever seen in my lifetime. I don't think career-wise you can compare him, obviously, because he simply doesn't run enough to be considered an all-time great, even by today's less taxing standards of starts, where horses start 6-7 times. That's about it. That was his third start of the year, or was it second? I don't know. I think it was his second start of the year. So we're going to have a horse going into the Breeders' Cup Classic making his third start. But individually, it was incredible. I mean, he just made a mockery of that field. And I think in retrospect, people are downplaying the competition a little bit. those are some pretty good horses that he left in his wake. We know about Country Grammar. He not only won in Dubai a $12 million race, he ran a good second off a long layoff in Saudi in a $20 million race, I believe it is. Um, Royal Ship had just defeated him in the San Diego, running a good race, and he just made just trounced them with consummate ease. So I'm not sure what people would expect more from one individual performance. It's as good as races I've ever seen.
Yeah, I echo a lot of those sentiments, Craig. I felt the same way. I also was glad that you guys went with a higher number. It felt right for the performance that I saw, and to believe that the horse ran any lower than that, I think you would have to kind of buy into the idea that nobody else showed up in the race, which of course is possible. Sometimes when a horse runs off from the field like that, it has a lot to do with the horses in behind not running up to their optimal level. I wouldn't say it necessarily felt like that. Country Grammar, he seemed to run his race. He was just in a different zip code than Flightline at the end. And when I was watching the race, my jaw was kind of figuratively on the floor. I mean, I in my time watching races, can't recall another performance like that or having seen one live. I go back to Go Sapper. I mean, I was younger back then. I remember watching all of his races, being impressed by the numbers that he ran. But I went back and watched his Breeders' Cup Classic. I watched Go Sapper's Islin, that famous race when he got the 128 Beyer. And, they were impressive when you compared them to the rest of the races that day. They came up extremely fast. But I didn't get that same feeling like I was watching something quite this special. And, I wasn't around for Secretariat, the great horses of the 70s. And I don't want to, as you said, compare the resumes of those horses that were competing at a different time when racing looked very different. The landscape was different to what Flightline is now. And, the way we campaign our good horses these days, it's just a completely, different outlook on the sport. But this felt like those kinds of performances. I mean, this horse, I don't know if we'll see him do it again in the Breeders' Cup, but this was something unlike anything that I've seen in my lifetime. And it felt like that the speed figure you gave out was deserved because this wasn't off the charts kind of effort.
Yeah, and the one quick thing I'll mention is if Flightline wasn't in the race and Country Grammar and Royal Ship ran two with Country Grammar or winning by whatever the margin was, I think it was 6 or 7 or 8 lengths over Royal Ship, and he ran a 130 Timeform US speed figure or a 110 Beyer speed figure or whatever, nobody would have batted an eye because there was another route race on the card that was pretty easy to compare it to. I mean, maybe a mile and a quarter and a mile aren't always directly comparable, but they're pretty close. So I just think it really puts into perspective what this guy did on this day. And it was well worth the wait. I know both of us tried to foolishly beat him. And if I had to do it again, I probably would, but I won't do it going forward.
No, I mean, I don't think either of us should ever apologize for trying to take a shot against a 1-10 favorite. I mean, that's you're always trying to look for the right value, and most horses that are attempting to do what Flightline did are not able to pull it off in the manner that he did, or I should phrase it differently. Most horses that have shown such brilliance going shorter don't actually get better when they stretch out to a mile and a quarter for the first time. It's, trainers always say, oh, my horse is going to get better with added distance, or he trains like one that's going to get better with added distance. And as horse players, we kind of roll our eyes, oh, it's just trainers speak. And John Sadler said it, and he kind of had like a little twinkle in his eye, like, don't be surprised when this horse actually gets better at 10 furlongs. And boy, was he right. That was not trainer speak. That was perhaps an understatement. I mean, it's just amazing what this horse is able to do. And I mean, I think we all just have to cross our fingers that he stays sound for at least one more race, because you want to see a horse like this get the chance to compete in the Breeders' Cup. And I don't know if I'd be wanting to run against him right now. Let's go back to this past week where we started and talk about some of those Grade 1 races for the 2-year-olds from Saturday and Sunday at Del Mar. The feature race on their closing day Sunday, Craig, was that Del Mar Futurity, won by the Bob Baffert-trained Cave Rock. And I mean, it's a little early to compare this horse to anything like Flightline, but I mean, he's earning the kinds of speed figures that say he might be among the best 2-year-olds that we've seen in quite some time.
Yeah, this was quite the effort from him as well. Certainly not on the flight line level. It's a little bit early for that, but he went off the 5 favorite, and he didn't disappoint at all. He had run on Timeform US a 112 first time out. It hasn't quite made the charts yet, but my assistant has told me his figure for the race on Sunday will be a 119. So he took a nice step forward. He did it. I love the way that he did it. He faced some pressure early, albeit from his stablemate, but it was real pressure, and he was able to just dispose of that and was pulling away at the end. So just another really good Baffert 2 year old.
Yeah, I mean, it really does seem like Baffert has an embarrassment of riches right now among the 2-year-olds. We're going to talk about a few of them on this podcast that will be worth following moving forward. And it doesn't seem like some of the legal troubles that Bob Baffert went through this year have really affected his business too much, because he has quite the stable of juveniles this year. And Cave Rock, I mean, he's a son of Arrogate, who we're going to talk about a little bit on this podcast, having 2 Grade 1 winners this past weekend among the juveniles. Not a sire that had gotten off to a quick start in his first crop. It seems like he's got some real runners in the second crop, and interesting pedigree with Cave Rock being by Arrogate, who of course won the Travers and the Breeders' Cup Classic going 1.25 miles. But on the bottom side of Cave Rock's pedigree, a lot of precocity. The dam, I think, won the Schuylerville as a 2-year-old. Very good sprinting 2-year-old filly. So we'll see which one Cave Rock ultimately is going to take after. But just it seemed in that Del Mar Futurity performance that he had that sought after combination of speed and stamina, because he went so fast up front. I mean, so fast that I was kind of questioning the fractions a little bit, but I mean, he just kept going, and the way that he ran away from his stablemate having a meltdown and then just continued barreling on through the wire, it does make you think that he might be able to get a bit farther distance. So definitely an exciting 2-year-old for Baffert.
And I did get, as I always do when times like that pop up, I got a lot of questions about it, and it was fine, as are the times at Del Mar now. They've went back to the beam system for the most part. All the dirt races are timed with the beam, and it was fine. He's just a really fast horse, and as you said, the pace was pretty quick. I don't think it'll be coded in red, but it certainly wasn't blue either. The pace figures are going to be about 10 points faster than the final time figure, so just a really promising effort.
Not quite as fast was the Grade 1 for the fillies on Saturday, the Del Mar debutante, though the same sire did produce the winner of this race, Arrogate, the sire of the Nose Victor and Tell Me No Lies, who got up to win over the Bob Baffert trained Home Cooking. I think Baffert's going to be okay, Craig, not winning this race. I mean, he definitely had some nice 2-year-olds racing elsewhere this weekend or outside of the Del Mar debutante, but it does feel like Home Cooking might have run the best race, even though she got nosed out on the wire.
Yeah, this is one I was out on Saturday, and I still haven't had a chance to go back and watch it. Maybe you can fill us in on the trip a little bit. It did seem like people were not very happy with it. Maybe some of it was the horse, just reading the chart comments. But it was a decent race. Definitely Home Cooking got the faster speed figure from Timeform US, got a 101 because of pace adjustment. All of the pace figures are in red, kind of rushed up after that start. And I think And Tell Me No Lies just kind of was able to pick up a tired horse who had run into a lot of trouble early.
Yeah, I mean, Home Cooking, I mean, she did get bumped a little bit at the start, and she was not on the lead initially. I would say that Mike Smith rode her like a 3-5 shot. He just seemed like he was very confident she was going to win throughout this race, made an early move to the lead on the far turn, kind of opened up like he expected her to continue on with it in the final furlong, but I think maybe he just underestimated the pace a little bit, because they were moving pretty quickly up front, and she made that move to the lead in a very fast portion of the race, and she just got pretty leg weary in the final eighth of a mile, and Tell Me No Lies was there to pick her up. I would say that Home Cooking was the better filly on the day. I don't know if she was much the best or was that decisive. I'm not sure that I'd necessarily want her that much more moving forward. We'll see which one is going to improve with added distance. But I thought they both ran well enough. It just wasn't the fastest race overall. It felt like maybe the ride, though, did get Home Cooking beat on the day.
And as you mentioned, And Tell Me No Lies is out of Arrogate, and it's just a shame given what we've seen lately with how good his crop is doing this year, that we're not going to see many more of his horses, unfortunately. But he's one who certainly given Gunrunner a run for his money this year, at least so far.
Yeah, we've seen a few nice ones, and obviously Arrogate had that Kentucky Oaks winner earlier in the year from his prior crop, Secret Oath. So after getting off to a very slow start last year, I mean, he's had a little more success, which you would expect. He was such a brilliant racehorse. We'll see how far And Tell Me No Lies can kind of take this stake success. She's going to have to run faster in her subsequent start, but between these two, it does feel like she does have some pedigree to go longer. Her dam was a very good horse, a dirt router. I think she was fourth in the Kentucky Oaks, third in the Apple Blossom. The dam's actually a half-sister to Macho Again, who is probably best known for losing that head decision to Rachel Alexandra in the Woodward from just over a decade ago. So there's pedigree for And Tell Me No Lies to go longer on both sides of the pedigree. We'll just see if she's able to improve in subsequent starts. Let's move on to one of the non-2-year-old stakes events from this past weekend at Del Mar. That was the Grade 2 John C. Maybe, also run on the Saturday card. This one going 1 1/8 on the turf for the fillies and mares. And quite an upset here, Craig, as Going Global had become a pretty reliable force in this older filly and mare turf division out in California. But she just got beat here by Avenue de France, who got the jump on her and never let Going Global by in the stretch.
I didn't really see any excuses other than, I mean, it's not even an excuse, but the pace was pretty quick. We have all the fractions coded in red for the 1 1/8 race, and maybe Avenue de France was just a little further back. It's not like Going Global was up on the pace though, and it just seemed like she ran the better race. She only got a 117 speed figure. Going Global got a 118 for being just a little bit closer to that pace early, but I would say she got beat fair and square. It was definitely, I think she was 2-5 or 1-5 in here. So definitely a big upset, as you termed it, which seems a little odd for what normally these turf races are pretty wide open. But she's been that dominant so far.
Yeah, it says in the chart that she had a slight steady at the 3/8 pole, and when I went back and watched the replay, it's there. I mean, I wouldn't say it was severe by any means. What basically happened was Avenue de France was making a rush to the lead with about 3/8 of a mile to go, and Going Global and Umberto Rispoli just seemed like they got a little caught off guard that a horse was moving that early, and he thought about going with her, but just had nowhere to go and basically had to tap on the brakes behind the tiring runner in front of him. But she got around that foe and had at least a quarter of a mile to get back on terms with Avenue de France, and just could never do it. I've always felt like 1 1/8 is stretching Going Global to the limit. She's probably naturally more of a miler, and I think in a race like this, that did turn into more of a test of stamina because they went such an honest clip up front, and that horse, the eventual winner, Avenue de France, went for home so early. Going Global just couldn't unleash that turn of foot. She kind of had her speed drawn out over a longer distance of ground, and typically when a horse wants to go a little bit shorter, that can be their vulnerability.
And that's a very good point because both of her losses this year at short prices have come at that 1 1/8 distance. She's won at that distance before, but that was as a 3-year-old. And things just seem to change as these horses get older and mature, where speed's probably not quite the weapon it was when she was just 3.
Yeah, speaking of the 2-year-olds again, there were a couple of turf stakes this past weekend at Del Mar that we're not going to talk about in any great depth. I suppose they'll produce some starters for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf and Juvenile Fillies Turf, so maybe they're races that you want to go back and watch. Neither one got particularly impressive speed figures, Craig, but I will just briefly mention the winner on Sunday of the Del Mar Juvenile Turf, Pax Wallop, because this horse did win by 4 lengths, or 4 1/4 lengths in a 14-horse field. I mean, that's somewhat noteworthy, even though the race didn't come back that fast. When you're beating 13 rivals and doing so dominantly, there's some quality there.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, he's only going to get about a 90 speed figure, but when you win that easily and you do it in a big field, I don't want to completely dismiss him. We've seen Jeff Mullins has done well with these young turf runners in the past, but I still won't want any of them come Breeders' Cup time. They're going to face a lot stiffer competition than what we saw this weekend.
Yeah, historically in those Breeders' Cup races, the West Coast horses are not the ones that you want. They're just not coming out of particularly tough races. But I did think from a visual standpoint, Pax Wallop showed some ability in his victory on Sunday. Another stakes for the 2-year-olds run this past week at Del Mar on Friday was the I'm Smokin' for the 2-year-old California breds. This one was won by the Peter Miller trained Giver Not a Taker, now 2 for 2 in his career. And look, Craig, this horse was not going to be competitive against Cave Rock in the Del Mar Futurity, but I thought for a California bred, this was a pretty nice second start.
It was. He's going to get 100 speed figure. He won it pretty easily. He was able to show that he can rate a bit, tracked off the pace a couple lengths, and looked really good through the stretch to me. He increased his figure by 19 points over that debut, which was a race I think was held back by what was a really slow pace at just 5.5 furlongs that day. So I wouldn't have judged him off that 81 number, but I'm not sure I would have projected him to run all the way up to the 100 that he ran here. So good effort from the Calbred, and that 100 will be competitive in open company in a lot of places and in a lot of races, just not against some of the other 2-year-olds we're talking about on this show at Del Mar.
Well, we can't talk about 2-year-old racing from this past week at Del Mar without mentioning one maiden race in particular, that being the 6th race on Saturday, a 5.5 furlong maiden event for the 2-year-olds that was dominated by Bob Baffert trainees. He swept the trifecta here, including sending out the very impressive debut winner, Speedboat Beach. Craig, when I watched this race back, I was kind of doing a double take. I got out my stopwatch to time the race because I just didn't believe it. It doesn't seem possible that 3 2-year-olds could earn speed figures like this. This race, you could talk about it more, but it came up faster than the Del Mar Futurity. Just very surprising that there would be this much quality concentrated in a maiden race.
It did seem odd, but I really can't knock my assistant for coming up with this speed figure. It looked like a really straightforward day to my eye when I looked at the worksheet, and just one there's really nothing else you can do except assume these were all really good horses. And in this case, it was the other Baffert, I should say, as one of his other runners, whose name I don't want to pretend to pronounce. Ran second at even money. Obviously, this one took some support because he was only 2-1 in the field, but he really finished off this race strong. When you look at the fractions, his come home time and his pace figure went from a 114 after about 3.5 furlongs all the way to a 123 at the finish, and that's not easy to do in a sprint race.
Yeah, just amazing. I can't recall too many 2-year-olds getting 120 plus TimeformUS speed figures in their career debuts. I actually don't even know if there are any, Craig, going back since you started publishing these figures for TimeformUS. But very impressive performance from Speedboat Beach, and also nice efforts from the second and third place finishers, also from the Bob Baffert barn. You made reference to Hey Jazzy, the one who already had some experience. He, of course, is that $3.55 million purchase by Bernardini from earlier this year. A little disappointing in his career debut, but clearly took a big step forward here in his second start, though still a maiden. And even the third place finisher, Fort Bragg, who was the one of the 3 that was not right up on the pace, he actually passed some runners to get up into third. 109 TimeformUS speed figure on debut is certainly nothing to sneeze at, and he's arguably the one of the 3 that's best bred to go some longer distances, being by Tappet. So this could have just been a very key maiden race. So anytime I see experienced horses improving their speed figures by this much off their prior races, my eyebrows do raise a little bit. We had 3 horses who had prior races in here. The 3 of them improved their speed figures by an average of 32 points. I have to wonder about that a little bit, but like you said, the track seemed consistent and you can't really tear apart the number too much in the context of the day. It's possible that they all just took big steps forward.
Yeah, the one thing I am going to do, because I haven't done it yet, is just to be safe, I'm going to have to go time this race. I assume it's correct, but we really didn't have anything to go on. As you said, some of these horses have run before, not very well. They didn't run very good speed figures, but the rest of the day, almost every single race projected within a point or two of a 30 variant. And that's what we wound up using for the day, was saying the track was 30 points fast, which won't mean a lot to people because they don't have our speed charts, but it's as consistent a day as you'll ever find. And obviously we don't have a projection for a late race like that maiden special weight race, so we just use the variant from all the other races. But just to be sure, because I have those same reservations as you, I am going to give it a double check.
Yeah, I mean, you're the timing guru, so I'll leave it up to you. I mean, when I looked at it briefly, I mean, and kind of timed it from video very crudely, I mean, I didn't see any major errors. I mean, if anything, maybe a few fractions off by a few tenths, but I'll leave all of that to you to work that out. But I was looking for some major error because it seemed like the race just came up so wildly fast, and I don't think that's the case here. It's just maybe one of those races that lives in isolation as containing a lot of quality. Let's move away from Del Mar and over to the undulating turf course at Kentucky Downs, where on Saturday they ran 6 graded stakes events. Let's begin with the longest of those, the Grade 2 Kentucky Downs Turf Cup. This one won by the 8-year-old New York-bred Red Knight, Craig, a horse that has been around for a long time, spent a lot of his years in the Bill Mott barn. Now he's with Mike Maker, but just kind of amazing that this horse is still performing at such a high level after all these years.
Yeah, he's a machine. I've mentioned earlier how I've kind of grown to love these older turf horses that just keep running. They're able to run similar speed figures for year after year. I assume because it's not like in these turf races, you're usually not all out. It just kind of comes down to the finish. And Red Knight certainly had one on Saturday. He had showed his good form in his return race, not necessarily speed figure wise, but he had looked good winning at Colonial Downs, and he showed his game this year, able to outgame Gufo to the wire. A horse who I would guess is probably the leader of the division still. It's a very shaky division here in the United States, but Red Knight showed he's probably just as good as anybody else we have out there, and he certainly is one that will run.
Yeah, he is a New York bred who has competed at the New York bred level, but also in a lot of open company stakes over the years. He's got so much stamina. He's, I think, even won a stakes going as far as 2 miles in the past. So the 1.5 miles at Kentucky Downs was right up his alley. And Craig, something I noticed watching these Kentucky Downs races from this past Saturday, and I'll admit I have not watched all of the races at Kentucky Downs. I primarily was watching the Saturday races, but it seemed like there was not a whole lot of movement or passing in the last couple of furlongs. If you did not make your move before you got to that uphill section in the final quarter mile, it just seemed like you weren't going to get there. And I mean, Gufo was one of the few horses that was making up ground at the very end of a race, but it even seemed like he had his chance to get past Red Knight, and it just seemed like as horses got to that uphill section, the momentum got stalled as they were trying to make up ground on the leaders. And Red Knight, he was farther back early, but Gerardo Corrales made that early sweep to the lead with about a quarter mile to go, and I think making that early move really did pay off given the way the course was playing.
And I don't think that was just Saturday either. I haven't seen all the races, but I'm pretty sure I've seen most of them at Kentucky Downs. And it has been really tough to pass in the stretch, which is something different from previous years, I believe, where we've seen closers do pretty good, but not so much this year. I don't know what's going on, that maybe that down or uphill finish is more taxing. But yeah, you nailed it. It wasn't just a Saturday thing. I should mention Red Knight. I gave him a 120 speed figure this race. Same thing that Gufo is going to get. I make speed figures for these races. They're not particularly hard to make, I won't say. No harder than any other track. But I talk about this all the time. I don't know how much utility they have when these horses go back to a more conventional course. So I kind of just store them for future use when these horses show up again at Kentucky Downs, and maybe see if they improve or not when they come out of these races. But I'm not going to knock Gufo because he only ran a 120 here. I would expect better when he moves back. And it's just one of those, it's really tough to judge because it's so different than what we see every place else.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're getting at what we see a lot of in these Kentucky Downs races over the years, that some horses that run well at these same distances over conventional American-style race courses just don't have that same success at Kentucky Downs, or they can't translate their form. And I think Gufo ran pretty well here. Christophe Clement is not a trainer that typically sends a lot of horses to Kentucky Downs. He did run 2 of his most high-profile turf horses there this past Saturday, and maybe he's wishing he hadn't. I don't know. Gufo ran a okay. I mean, the other one we'll talk about in a little bit that did not have much success. But yeah, I mean, sometimes these horses just can't translate their form, and these horses with big, explosive turns of foot sometimes just don't do as well over that uphill section at Kentucky Downs. So it's something to be aware of when horses run at Kentucky Downs, and maybe worth being a little bit forgiving when these horses come back to a different race course in their subsequent starts.
And the one thing I will say about Kentucky Downs, and we're going to talk about several other races, is I do think some horses get a conditioning edge racing here. We see it year after year where horses, no matter whether they ran good, bad, or indifferent at Kentucky Downs, do seem to run well coming out of there.
A little bit earlier in the day, this past Saturday at Kentucky Downs, they ran the Grade 3 Mint Million. This one was won by the Mike Maker trained Some Like It Hot Brown. Actually, another New York bred who unfortunately not able to get the full purses they're offering at Kentucky Downs because the subsidies from the Kentucky Thoroughbred Development Fund are only available to Kentucky breds. So some of these purses were depressed a little bit with, I think, non-Kentucky breds winning 5 out of the 6 stakes races on Saturday. But Some Like It Hot Brown, Craig, just such a cool horse. I mean, kind of like Red Knight, he's been competitive at this level for a number of years now. He's a 6-year-old, but he possesses such versatility. He's got that early speed that always makes him dangerous in races like this, and I think they just made the fatal mistake of leaving him alone in the front end on Saturday.
Yeah, Some Like It Hot Brown was kind of, I would say, not he wasn't a huge price, but he was a TimeformUS special in that he really hasn't had things go his way at all on turf this year. All 3 of his early races had quick early paces. He had trouble making the lead early, or in the case of his race in the Fasic Tipton Lure, he just went way, way too fast early. Not sure what happened that day. Don't remember if it was the horse or Virat Ortiz just got a little bit ambitious on the front end. But he ran well in that off the turf race when he tried dirt for the first time in a long time in his career. And like you said, when you let him get the early lead, he was able to set, I assume, pretty comfortable fractions. I don't make pace figures because I just don't trust the timing at Kentucky Downs yet. I don't want to get too deep into that, but we just do final time figures. But it seems like he had things his own way, and on a course where horses just couldn't really make up ground through that last couple furlongs there, he was home free.
Yeah, this race was a bit of a merry-go-round as the Mike Maker trained at Toe, and next who finished second in this race, basically just tracked his stablemate the entire way. Tried to get on terms with him in the stretch, but Some Like It Hot Brown, he's just such a game horse when he's on his day, and he was able to hold that foe off. Really not much running from the back of the pack. Pixelate won this race last year. He was never really able to get involved from the back. Gray's Fable, kind of maybe the key to this race because he's a horse that in the past has had a lot of early speed. Seems like they've changed up his running style a little bit, but also in this race he broke slowly or kind of broke in the air, so didn't really have his chance to get forward, and that just made Some Like It Hot Brown ultra tough to pass. Another front-running winner was seen a little bit later in the day in the Grade 3 Ladies Turf over that same 1 mile distance. This one was won by Delika, a horse who was coming off a Grade 1 victory in the Beverly D, run on that one-day Churchill card at the former Arlington meet back in August. And she had no trouble handling the cutback and distance here, Craig, because it was basically the same result as the Beverly D with her holding off Princess Grace.
Yeah, it looked like a carbon copy, just over a much different looking turf course than what we saw at Churchill Downs. But the results certainly didn't look different. It looked almost exactly the same, with the one exception that Princess Grace really never got on even terms with Delika like she did at Churchill, and maybe even got ahead in front there. She just wasn't able to get the job done. And Delika's proven really dangerous when she gets clear on the front end. She did so here and was game as usual. She got the same 119 speed figure that she ran last time. And this was one that actually the purse got a big upgrade, I think, because of the presence of the Lika. So it was one being a Grade 1 winner. It was higher than what was listed coming in. But just a nice effort from her. I'm still not sure these are horses that I would want to see like in a race like the Breeders' Cup. I'm not sure they're really true Grade 1 quality type fillies, but they're pretty good and racking up the money.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Dalika helped inflate the purse for everybody else. She, of course, not eligible to receive some of that extra money because she is a German bred. She's a really nice horse right now, and Al Stahl has her in fantastic form. I mean, since they have found that key to using her early speed, she's just been ultra dangerous in these races. Not really one that I'm pegging as going to be a Breeders' Cup kind of horse, but I think if they continue to find spots like this, she'll be very dangerous.
Yeah, and she's the kind of horse I like to make it to the Breeders' Cup because it certainly makes those races a lot more interesting.
That is true. She could inject some pace into a race like that. We saw another foreign bred winner that's trained in the U.S. in the turf sprint, or I should say the ladies sprint. That's won by Campanelli, the Wesley Ward trainee that has won Group 1 races overseas, came back from a recent trip to Royal Ascot where she was third in the Platinum Jubilee to record a victory stateside here, but she had to work pretty hard for this one, Craig. Bet down to 3-5 favoritism. Looked like she was going to deliver the kind of performance worthy of that support with about an eighth of a mile to go, but she got a little bit leg weary in that final 16th or so.
She did, and she wound up with a 121 speed figure, which is even a little better than she had run at Keeneland. But again, kind of take that with a grain of salt. Bay Storm was, maybe that cutting back in distance a little bit kind of helped her out and gave her a little more stamina than what we have seen from Campanelli. But it was a strong effort from her. I don't think sprinting on this course is really comparable at all to what we see most of the time in the U.S., even though they are just one-turn races. We talked about it on our preview show, they're at a lot longer distance than what we're used to seeing. So I think she'll be just fine turning back to 5.5, even 6. And I would think she's going to be a strong presence come Breeders' Cup Day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that they're pointing her towards the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, a race for which Wesley Ward could have a number of starters. We'll see how that all plays out. But this should have served as a good tightener for that kind of race. Going to 6.5, coming off the layoff, they needed to get a solid performance into her. I think they achieved that. You don't like to see her almost losing to a horse like Bay Storm. Not that Bay Storm is a bad horse. She's run some pretty big speed figures in the past. But Campanelli, she traveled for most of the race like she was superior to this group. She was racing on the outside for much of the way. I think it's debatable whether the inside part of the course was a little bit better, but she got there in the middle of the course and just hung to the left a little bit and seemed like she was looking around, not totally focused in the final 16th of a mile. So I think she's better than this, and we're probably going to see her step forward off this kind of effort.
Yeah, and I said Bay Storm was turning back. She was not turning back. What I meant to say was she was turning back to good form. Even though she had been winning, her speed figures had not been what they once were, but they were this time. She jumped back up into that 120 range. Again, it's Kentucky Downs, but it was definitely one of her better efforts.
The Grade 2 turf sprint for the males, a little bit earlier on that Saturday card, was won by the California-based runner Bran, who shipped in for this and got the victory over Artemis City Limits, who got away with a clear early lead. I would say Artemis City Limits is the kind of horse you want to be chasing down at the end of your races because he's one that does have a tendency to settle for second. But take nothing away from Bran. He showed up in this spot and beat a pretty decent field, including heavy favorite Arrest Me Red.
He's one that I have to say I did not see coming. He was able to get the job done. He ran a very similar speed figure, 120. And these were actually races that you could compare to the times, this one and the race won by Campanelli. So at least if you compare those two races, I think you get a pretty good judge. And it was a good effort by him. He actually was able to close some ground. He was pretty far back early on, towards the back half of the field anyway, and made a good run and was able to, as you said, he beat Artemis City Limits. I don't know that that's any great shakes at this distance, but holding off Arrest Me Red, I was pretty impressed.
Yeah, and I guess maybe we should note that Bram was one of a number of winners at Kentucky Downs among the stakes races on Saturday that had experience racing in Europe, and Kentucky Downs is one of these European-style turf courses. Brad, of course, had not raced at Kentucky Downs prior to this, but certainly seemed to get over this undulating ground with no problem, as he was finishing pretty strongly across the wire, actually passing rivals in the final quarter. Not something that we saw in a whole lot of the stakes racing at Kentucky Downs on Saturday. Craig, Arrest Me Red, who was third, I wouldn't say he was so disappointing because he was just out in no man's land about 5 wide for the entire race. That just was not the kind of trip that was going to be successful given the way these races were unfolding on Saturday. Had a little bit too much ground to make up in the stretch, so I'll be a little forgiving of him, though I'm still not sure that he's even in the top 2 among the best turf sprinters in the Wesley Ward barn.
I would agree with that. I thought, and you mentioned that it was hard to make up ground. I also thought it was hard to be outside for pretty much the entirety of the meet at Kentucky Downs. I mean, we saw some okay performances, but for the most part, horses were running well that were in the first 2 or 3 paths at the most, and he didn't appear to be that he was much further out than that for much of the race. But I agree with you. Even though he runs good speed figures and wins, I'm just not as sold as him on him as I am some others.
The last graded stakes race they ran on that Saturday card was the Grade 2 Franklin Simpson for the 3-year-old sprinters. This one going the 6.5 furlong distance. And this one, Craig, just wired on the front end by 19 to 1 shot, one timer. This Larry Ravelli trainee had never run up to this level on the turf before, though he had won on the turf. Just hadn't really looked like he was up to producing a performance of this quality. But, I mean, he got in front, opened up on this field under UT Baird, and they just never let anybody else in the race, including the heavy, heavy favorite, Big Invasion, who had to settle for third at 1-2.
Yeah, hats off to you if you had a winner at Kentucky Downs coming out of a race at Fairmount or FanDuel Racing these days in their last start, because I didn't see this one coming. But about the only thing I can say is it shows that speed is always going to be dangerous. And he was able to get that clear early lead on a course that you mentioned. It was tough to make up ground. It was better to be inside, and he took full advantage, actually getting a really big speed figure in here, a 122. And it's not really a big surprise because he won this race easily by over 4 lengths. I'm going to have to go back and watch Big Invasion's trip. It didn't look ideal to me. I've only got the chance to watch the race one time. It looked like he had some problems at the start, but he looked so dominant coming in. It feels like if he had shown up, he would have been closer than what he was at the finish.
Yeah, I watched his trip in particular. I didn't see a major excuse. He just seemed like a horse that never was that comfortable over the surface. He has that explosive turn of foot, and he just never showed any hint of it on this day. I don't know if it was the uphill course or just the surface at Kentucky Downs that wasn't agreeing with him, but he just did not show up here. I would assume they'll proceed on to the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint anyway. I wouldn't imagine they'll race him again before that. We'll see. I mean, there is about, I think, 8 weeks until the Breeders' Cup. Maybe if anything, Craig, this is the kind of performance that's just going to inflate his price when he has to step up against horses like Golden Pal and Campanelli, because he had looked so dominant against his fellow 3-year-olds coming into this race and just was not able to produce his best form here. But maybe it's that Kentucky Downs phenomenon you were describing, that it just does not suit some horses.
And I don't want to totally dismiss one timer. He just ran a big race. Maybe it's the course, so I don't want to get too carried away, but I wouldn't totally dismiss him when he comes back, because he took a big step forward. And it's not like he had been in bad form. He has won his share of short sprints, including even a 5 furlong race on the turf at Santa Anita when he was a 2-year-old. So he is a quick one, and I just don't want to underrate the effort. I do have to ask you, because I brought it up with Larry. I know we both have a soft spot in our heart for Call Me Midnight from earlier in the year, who actually ran in this race. And I'm going to pose the same question to you that I posed to Larry back then. When you look back in retrospect, what's the bigger upset? Rich Strike in the Derby or this horse beating Epicenter?
It is kind of funny. I know, I know that was one of our better opinions from last year's Derby Trail, liking this horse in the Lecomte when he beat Epicenter. And boy, does it feel like we got lucky that day in retrospect because I mean, Epicenter did all the hard work on the front end, and this horse got that perfect pace setup. It hasn't really worked out for Call Me Midnight since then, but maybe they would do well to get back to going a mile on dirt with him because it seemed like that really suited him in the past. The turf sprinting might not just might not be his gig, but Craig, getting back to your original point about One Timer and how well he seemed to run in this race, I mean, yeah, I don't want to take too much away from him, but this is just one of those races that was such a merry-go-round. I mean, Run Curtis Run, who was an equally big price, just ran around the racetrack in second. It was almost a trifecta of long shots because Heaven Street, who was basically a neck, two necks out of third, I mean, he almost held on after tracking in third and fourth most of the way at 48-1, looking kind of ridiculous on form coming in, and Big Invasion just barely got past him for third. So this just might be the kind of race I don't want to put a whole lot of stock in, but I agree, One Timer was very visually impressive on the day. Let's move on to a different venue, Pimlico. From this past Saturday, they ran a few stakes races, one graded. That was the Baltimore-Washington Turf Cup, won by Set Piece, a horse that we've gotten familiar to seeing in these Grade 2 and Grade 3 events. And Craig, it really seems like Set Piece has taken a liking to Pimlico because he's raced there twice now this year, and both of those have been visually impressive victories.
It was, and he ran a good speed figure. I think he actually ran the best speed figure of the weekend with a 123 for his win here. And it just seems like he's a horse who is just a cut below like really, really good horses, even though he runs some big speed figures at times. He seems to do his best running in these listed stakes, the grade 3 types. I think he had a little success in a grade 2, and that was at Pimlico. But I don't know if that was really a grade 2 race. It was a race where he beat Tango, Tango, Tango in a tone. So more like a grade 3 to me. So good effort from him. I just don't want to get too excited by him, no matter what speed figure he runs, because he just kind of seems to run to this level of competition no matter where he is.
Yeah, we've got a similar take on Set Piece. He so often he's hinted at being able to take that next step forward in a Grade 1 race, and it just seems like he doesn't ever quite get there. He did run well in the 4-star Dave back in 2021 when he was second to Got Stormy, but then he went the wrong way after that in a couple of tougher Grade 1 spots, and it just maybe feels like he's one of these horses, like you said, that needs slightly softer competition to really shine. But boy, does he shine when he finds the right field. I mean, he went from last to first in the span of about an eighth of a mile. I mean, he just ran right by this field once Sheldon Russell finally asked him to go. This was a visually impressive victory, and he was much the best. I'm just a little skeptical if it's going to translate to success in a race like, let's say, the Grade 1 Keeneland Turf Mile if they decide to take a shot there next month.
Right, and I was looking while you talked. He actually did one in grade 2 in the Y stand, but I don't know that that was really a grade 2 field either. I mean, some like it, Hop Brown was second that day. He's good. We've talked about him, but I don't know that he's really a top class. Cool horse, but not a top class horse.
In the race right before that Grade 3 event at Pimlico on Saturday, they ran the ungraded Light the Fuse Stakes, going 6 furlongs for the older sprinters, and this one was won by Sibelius, Craig, a horse that had been okay throughout the winter at Aqueduct and competing in the spring at Belmont, picking up some minor awards and optional claiming races. But over the summer, this horse has just really turned a corner for trainer Jeremiah O'Dwyer, and now twice in a row, he has registered dominant victories with pretty impressive speed figures.
I remember giving that speed figure at Saratoga, and I was a little leery because he jumped all the way up to a 123. It fit with the day. It just seemed a little out of character, but he was able to back it up at Pimlico. He got a 122 for the win on Saturday, and he won even easier than he did last time, winning by over 7 lengths. And it's not like he beat a bunch of scrubs in here. He beat some pretty decent horses, particularly in Jackson Traveler, who was the runner-up. I mean, he's got some nice PPs and has won some decent races. So to beat him this easily shows this horse is just in really top form right now.
Yeah, he had been in some tough spots over the winter and spring, beaten by horses like Baby Yoda and Highly Motivated, Southern District, who looked like he was in such good form back in the early spring for Chad Brown. And they tried to stretch him out, but it really seems like he's that pure 6 furlong sprinter, and he's responded so well to the turn back in distance in some recent races, and just in fantastic form right now. And we'll see what they decide to do with him, but he's running the kind of speed figures that say he could be competitive in some graded stakes events if they choose to take a shot in a race like that this fall. Let's finish things up with one more race from this past week, actually a stakes from earlier in the week on Thursday at Delaware Park, the Cape Hemlepin Stakes, which is traditionally run on the turf, Craig. This race was taken off the turf due to some rain, and I think we might have seen a new star dirt marathoner emerge in Next. I know the Connections were not intending to run this horse a mile and a half on the dirt, but I imagine they'll be seeking out those spots moving forward for him.
When you win like he did, granted, I'm not sure. Maybe you could just say he beat a bunch of turf horses in here, though a couple of them had mild dirt form coming in. But when you beat him by 18 lengths like he did, I guess maybe you at least got to give it one more try, because it was just kind of a eye-popping effort from him. Not sure. There's not a ton of spots for these horses, but there's more than there used to be. I think there's one coming up at Parks pretty soon, maybe a little too soon, but we know there's one on Breeders' Cup Day, so who knows where he'll show up next, but I would certainly give him another chance at the mile and a half or even longer.
And Craig, I should pull up the TimeformUS chart because I don't have it right in front of me. I mean, I didn't put a stopwatch to it, but the chart has this horse coming home his last quarter in 23.54 seconds, I think. I mean, that's a crazy closing split given the track speed going a mile and a half on the dirt. I mean, and when I watched the race back, I kind of believe it because he was just kind of, galloping with the rest of the field coming to the top of the stretch. And once this rider asked him to go, and I mean, he was ridden out. I mean, this was not like a wrapped up win going, by 18 lengths. I mean, this rider rode him through the finish line, but I mean, he just absolutely exploded after the mile and a quarter through that final 2 furlongs of the race. I mean, he was flying across the finish line like Arrogate in the Travers.
Part of that, I think, is because of the pace. We do have all the fractions coded in blue. It was pretty much even pace figures throughout in the very low hundreds, 107, 104. So he wasn't really doing a lot of running. But still, at a mile and a half to finish off in that kind of time, it almost doesn't matter how slow you went. That's what you want to see from a horse who's been trying to run these longer distance. He really finished off the race. And that kind of explains the margin. I mean, he was almost like running in a different, like he jumped in at the 8th pole, like Trevor Denman would say, or at the quarter pole.
Yeah, it's kind of funny looking back at this horse's past performances because he had previously been with Wesley Ward, and he's only run 2 prior dirt routes in his career. One of those was when he first got on dirt as a 2-year-old after trying turf and synthetic, and he won an allowance race by almost 12 lengths, going a mile and a 16th on the dirt at Keeneland, also in an off-the-turf race. And then they ran him in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, where he got involved chasing that pace set by Jackie's Warrior and others that was insanely fast and fell apart. I mean, he finished last in that race behind Essential Quality and Hot Rod Charlie, but I mean, those were his only 2 prior dirt routes, and now he's finally gotten back into longer dirt race, and lo and behold, that seems like it's what he wants to do. The dirt marathon division is typically pretty thin, Craig, and it needs some horses, especially those with early speed, and it'll be cool to see him get a chance in another race like that.
Right. I mean, he's 2 for 3 with his 2 wins coming by now almost 30 lengths or a little more than 30 lengths. And as you say, I could never grow tired of talking about that Breeders' Cup Juvenile with that insane pace we saw that year when Essential Quality wins. Not only was this horse up close to that 147 pace figure after a quarter mile, he was doing it while he was 4 wide around the first turn. So I think we can excuse that one, and maybe they just kind of lucked into something here.
Yeah, it seems like that might be the case. Well, that's all the races to recap on this edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. Craig, it's great to be back with you talking about these races after missing the last week. I will, of course, be with you for the next several weeks as we look ahead to the TimeformUS forecast on Friday. And, they are running this new Belmont at the Big A meet, I think is the official name for it. Back, if you're looking at the abbreviation in your PPs, I think that the stakes races on Saturday are the final legs of that Turf Triple Series, the Jockey Club Derby and Jockey Club Oaks. So we'll see how that card comes up. Maybe that'll be a candidate for us to find a pick 5 sequence to talk about on the forecast.
Yeah, I'll take whatever you say because I don't have time to handicap the next couple days because I have to go do programming to deal with this code. So thanks for ending us on a sour note. No, I'm just kidding. I actually don't mind. It never hurts to sharpen up my very rusty computer programming skills. So I haven't had opportunity to do that for a few months. So I'm kind of looking at it as a learning opportunity instead of an irritation.
Yes, that not the decision of those that put out the past performances. It's just something that people like you and those who make speed figures and deal with horse racing data just kind of have to deal with. It's the decision they made, so we'll go with it. I kind of do get it. I understand. I mean, people. There's a certain perception about Aqueduct, and these are some high-profile races that aren't typically run at that track. So that they're trying to achieve that perception of the quality of racing that they'll be putting out there. So we'll see how all of that works out. I'm sure everything will get all the racing programmers will get the kinks worked out over the next several days with regard to that meet. But looking forward to some of the racing that will take place at Aqueduct in the coming months, and we'll see how that Saturday card comes up when we look at races to talk about on the TimeformUS forecast later in the week. Craig, as I said, it was great to be back with you, and to all of you, thanks for listening this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. As I said, thanks for listening, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast coming up on Friday.